has any questions, they can type, okay, at Zoom or at YouTube, and I'll check and I'll pass him the questions at the end. So thank you very much, and I'll start the presentation 45 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation of COPPEAD and Professor Rodrigo to present my last article. I will project the share my screen. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Okay, just a moment. Sorry. Okay. Now you can. So, yes?
Now it's okay.
Okay, thank you. So basically, this is my brief curriculum vitae. I did my graduation university at FRJ in computer science, and later I did my finance master in PUC and the doctorate in business at COPPEAD. And I have 30 plus years of experience at BNDES. Some experience, 18 years, in fact, of experience at managerial positions at BNDES, 8 years of experience as board member in listed companies at Beatriz. So this may explain why, after over 30 years of looking at corporate governance practice from a financial standpoint, I became interested in this subject. And this was the subject of my doctorate, of my PhD. So my thesis is essays on CEO and executive turnover in Brazil, the role of corporate governance. And from the thesis, I published 2 articles co-written with my thesis advisor, Professor André Carvalhal. The first one was published in 2020 and was aiming at looking at state-owned companies, and this last one that we will cover today was published this year, addressing top management turnover in Brazil, the role of corporate governance in family-controlled companies. Every company may face its share of problems, including governance problems, but typically they will vary according to the business environment and ownership structure. This is what we are going to explore. Okay. So our research question is how effective boards are in monitoring and replacing executives in Brazil, and if the ownership structure and governance standards are important to board effectiveness. It's an empirical work that will investigate whether adopting higher governance standards can make a difference in executive turnover. Ownership structure can make a difference in which metrics main shareholders will try to maximize, and which governance problems may arise from their choices. I believe it's a timely subject, as recently 2 important companies have changed their ownership structures and now both face different governance problems. Differently than many in the market, we don't believe in universal governance formula that works best for every company. But notwithstanding this, there are specific problems that can be mitigated through adoption of best practice. And here we have this quote. This is known to be the best opening line literature and has an impact beyond time and space. So it's nice to have a reminder to us. It's nice also to have my name close to Tolstoy. And I believe that often all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in some way. Probably we can substitute this for companies or countries, and still will work. On the next slide, we have just some analogies that I would like to mention to give you some backdrop or some overall view of how we see the problems. because it's often we can make comparison between turnover processing companies and in soccer teams, in sport teams, or political entities. So this piece of literature that we brought here, this work by several professors that was published in the Leadership Quarterly, make those analogies. And we believe there are two. Everybody knows that the likelihood of changing a soccer coach after a streak of losses is big, or that a politician most likely will not be re-elected if performance is poor. So clearly, performance matters, but its importance will vary according to the overall context, overall environment of the company. So depending on the ground rules that can facilitate or make more difficult to challenge leadership, turnover will be more likely. It's also important to recap the typical agency problems between principals, shareholders, and agents, executives. This typical problem is also valid between the relation of shareholders and board members, the key aspects in turnover process in listed companies. And there is also some concerns or some questions about the level of real independence of board members. We are not going to explore, but it's important to understand that those questions matter in decision-making process in companies about turnover of executives, and also that much of the literature covers developed markets. So there is a knowledge gap in emerging economies where ownership is more concentrated. Also, these are important in real life and not only academy, and they are of interest to researchers not only in finance, but also in strategy, HR, and several other fields. Here, some literature review that also proposes a research agenda, and that will both show that CEO succession or turnover is also a process. They are natural events the company will face from time to time, and companies have to prepare to handle them. And several variables are influencing this process, including the environment, if they are or not in emerging economies, how is the composition of the board, how is the size of the TMT, and organization's ownership, culture, and several other aspects. Many believe that what works best for corporations with dispersed ownership in developed markets can also be applied without any change in emerging economies, where ownership and environment can be quite different. This is something that we are going to explore. And of course, the relationship between the CEO and the board is critical at several points in the succession process. Again, here we have another literature review about CEO succession questions. And here we can see that there are several dimensions that researchers explore, including when a succession should happen, how it happens, who is selected, what are the consequences, and several secondary and tertiary factors. In fact, you can see here that pre-succession firm performance is an important one. The size of the pie is related to how often they appear in literature. But also it's important to notice that often there are few hints of why a decision is taken. So it's something that happens in board rooms, and often it's not clear how these happen and what are the real reasons. Here another piece of literature that is important that tries to connect corporate governance with how good is the corporate governance, the role of external and internal mechanisms, and besides what the legal system is quite important, and if there is a market for corporate control or not. So something that is quite different from the US here in Brazil. And we can see also that another important factor is the role of managerial incentives and of reputation of CEOs. Another important paper, in fact, that addresses more the strategy side, but the questions, what the real role of top executives to performance. And the upper echelons theory will look at the contribution of executives to firm value, to firm performance. And so the question is if they really matter to financial performance globally. There are evidences that in the US, they do matter, but also research shows that the national contests will moderate how executive contribution to performance will vary depending on the institutional context in each country. After this overview of the landscape, the global landscape of governance, we will address the Brazilian corporate governance landscape, why things are different in Brazil. And we can see here that besides the typical governance problems between principals and agents and between shareholders and executives, we have also a typical problem of principal and principal conflicts, where controlling shareholders and minority shareholders clash in terms of the interests in the company. They may diverge, and this has consequence also. Two papers that make this recap about the evolution of corporate governance practices in Brazil. And we have faced those papers were written during looking at the 90s, especially, where several governance problems hit Brazilian companies. They still are present, but since then we had a reform in the societary law, increasing minority rights, and also the creation of the Novo Mercado that we will address in the next slide. And of course, several of those problems were potentialized and magnified by the use of dual-class shares and pyramidal structures. So here in this slide, we'll cover Novo Mercado. It's important to highlight to probably international readers and also people that are not aware of the evolution of corporate governance in Brazil. What are the characteristics of Novo Mercado? In fact, there are several differentiated levels of governance. Novo Mercado is the highest standard of corporate governance in Brazil. It was a special listing segment created by B3, and that had grown a lot in the past 15 years. It was created in this context of corporate governance crisis in the 90s, where minority shareholders were often victims of expropriation due to conflicts of interests. It was based on the international experience, the creation of the German Neuer market, and it has only voting shares, one-class shares only. So one share on vote rule that was important to investors, is important to investors. Nowadays is being also questioned by some sectors, especially technology. But it was a precondition for companies that were willing to raise capital to resolve some of those governance issues. It has also a higher number of independent board members than legally required. It offered 100% tag-along rights, which is over the 70% tag-along rights that are offered by this revision in law, and has a minimum free float some dispersion of capital is also required, so at least 25% of the capital, and has higher disclosure requirements. So it was the preferred list segment for companies based in EU actor with investors in IPOs. Over 100 companies since then have approached investors by listing at Novo Mercado. Here we summarize some of the previous researches, some of those findings of previous researches in Brazil, and it's in literature in general, it's well known the negative relationship between fund performance and CEO turnover, but in several of those works, there was no significant relation between performance and executive turnover in general. Also, some of those papers try to address the importance of corporate governance, variables and ownership variables, but with mixed results. So variables that relate to the number or the proportion of shares owned by the largest shareholder, or the number of independent board members, they were used with mixed results. That's probably because of the heterogeneity of those numbers. We will have a different approach here that we'll cover in the next slide. So here we start to look at the data or the variables and statistics used in this research. So we have a set of variables measuring turnover, CEO turnover, IR director turnover, and executive turnover in general. Some variables measuring firm performance, others measuring size of the TMT, the size of top management team, and if the CEO and the IR director have a same person accumulates both positions, and other control variables, and also some variables related to the structure of control of those companies. General turnover statistics are compatible with previous studies in Brazil and abroad, but we have to pay special attention to family companies. That's the largest group in our sample. That has also the lowest turnover rates. We were able to identify CEO turnover events from 2010 to 2017. Our universe is composed of 267 listed companies, and about 50% of them are family controlled. We'll have 1,919 firm year observations, and we analyze what the breakdown of those informations through several statistical analyses, and also the relation between the variables. So we have here, we can see that family companies that have the lowest turnover ratios, in fact, the largest turnover ratio is of state-owned enterprise, something that's not surprising also because of the political influence at SOEs. And literature shows that family companies, despite being understudied, have specific governance issues and are present everywhere, in fact. We have now a hit stream, the TV series Succession, that shows the governance problems in family companies, and they happen even in the US. Well, a key aspect of this study is how we identify the turnover events in top management. One of our objectives is to look at the impact of enemy listing in different types of control ownership and how they affect the CEO turnover performance sensitivity, looking at impacts of improved governance on turnover sensitiveness. difficult often to have reliable data for doing new research in Brazil, but we were able to have access to this database using also some R packages that were available that automated this process, and also to identify the executives that are named as the CEO and the investor relations director. They are the ones who have to sign annually the financial statements filed at the CVM and are seen as the most important executive for investors. Some information here, in fact, in 19.3% of the observations, the CEO is also the IR director. Often the IR director is also the CFO, but it's not explicit in document feeding. Sometimes we accumulate this position, others not. And also we were able to capture the information and the names that in the forms filled the CVM, and able to look at the overall changes in the team. We identified 326 CO turnovers in our sample. Most companies face at least one CO during our sample period. Here we have also the breakdown of turnover between NM listing and non-NM listing. And we can see there is a difference between those groups for the whole sample, but especially relevant for family-controlled companies. In fact, we see an inversion. Although NM companies face fewer turnovers in general, for family companies, we can see here a bigger ratio of turnover, of CO turnover, and overall executive turnover. This makes sense. And also, we can see here that this is a phenomenon that has been growing a lot in the past few years. All those turnover ratios saw an increase over time. So although on average they compare with the international experience, also is discussed in literature, international literature, that we are seeing growing trends of turnover. So nowadays the executive life is shorter, and the tenure is shorter, and more often, due to several shocks and characteristics, we are seeing replacement of executives happening more often with this growing trend. Here we formulate our hypothesis, basic hypothesis. First of all, we will test if there is a negative relation between CEO and IR director turnovers and firm performance. We use two firm performance measures, the return on assets and the stock performance. Our second hypothesis is that this negative relation between turnover rates and firm performance is stronger for firms listed in Novo Mercado. And our third hypothesis is that this negative relation between turnover and firm performance is weaker in family-controlled NM-listed companies. So family-controlled companies listed in Novo Mercado will have weaker turnover ratios. After looking at CEO and IR director as dependent variables, we try to investigate those same hypotheses at general executive turnover activity. Those are the regressions that we use to test our three hypotheses. And our goal is to generate some stylized effects that will enhance our knowledge about governance and control influence on CO turnover, and help investors and funds handle those events from a market perspective. So this is our basic model, and we can see here that performance is always negative and significant as expected, both for CEO turnover and for IR turnover, IR director turnover, and both using return on assets and stock return as firm performance metrics. We can see also that the fact, the dummy variable that we use to show if the CEO and the IR director are the same important is also relevant in panel B when we are looking at the IR director turnover, which means that when the CEO accumulates the IR role, IR turnover is greater. And also when we restrict our sample to eliminate observations where the CEO and the IR director are the same person, we can still see that firm performance is negative and significant. Then we start to add more variables to our basic model. First of all is M&A listing, novo mercado listing. And we can see here that the only return on assets remains negative and significant in our panels, but stock return is not significant anymore, still negative, but not significant. But the interaction of NM stock return is significant. NM listing is positive and significant for CEO and IR director turnover when using return on asset as the firm performance metric. And this shows that corporate governance can increase the CEO turnover performance sensitivity. So we have here evidence not only that our first hypothesis is true, but also that our second hypothesis related to NM listing is also important, as NM listing and its interaction with stock return are significant, showing that corporate governance can make a difference in CEO performance sensitivity. Then we add the dummy variable representing family-controlled companies, the fund, as the explanatory variable to our basic model. And again, we can see that firm performance is negative and significant in all panels, as we predicted in hypothesis 1. And family companies, the FAM dummy is negatively significant for CEO and IR director turnover. Only one return on assets is used as the performance metric. Also, we can see here the family-controlled companies have lower turnover ratios. This is a characteristic that we already have foreseen, and it's shown in literature. Often there are family members appointed at top positions in companies, often the CEO or some relative is from the family, and this may explain why there is lower turnover sensitivity and lower turnover rates. So in the next slide, we will look at the combination of NM listing and the FAM as explanatory variables to CEO turnover. It's a slightly different regression combining those terms. And we can again see that the return on assets negative and significant in all panels as expected. That for family-controlled companies also negative and significant in all panels. with return on assets as the performance metric. So family-controlled companies have fewer turnover events. And we can see again that the interaction of first, NM listing and family-controlled companies positive and significant when rho is the performance metric. So the interaction of the two dummies is positive, increasing the likelihood of turnover happening. And also the interaction of NM listing and stock return is significant for CO turnovers in panels A and C. So despite stock return is not significant for CO turnover, this interaction with NM listing is significant, which shows that bad performance for listed companies in Novo Mercado will be a factor for increasing the likelihood of a CO turnover. This shows that corporate governance can increase the CO performance sensitivity for family companies. Using these previous models, we will now address a general top team management turnover, general executive turnover, and we have 3 regressions here covering return on assets firm performance and 3 covering stock return as firm performance metric. And we can see here that firm performance is negative and significant when return on assets is the performance metric in model 1, showing that negative performance can increase executive turnover in general, as also expected in our first hypothesis. And this is especially true in NM listed companies, in Novo Mercado listed companies, as the interaction of firm performance with NM is negative and significant in models 2 and 3, 5 and 6. So both for return on assets as firm performance and for stock return as firm performance metric. Also, the duality of roles, the accumulation of roles by CEO and IR director is also significant and increases executive turnover in general. Here we will show some of the robustness check that we've done. We try to confirm our findings through those robustness checks. First, we use not only absolute but also relative performance. This is something that's discussed in the literature. We don't see any difference between using absolute or relative performance. We have used other turnover metrics that are not reported here. For instance, return on equity or Tobin metric was also performed. Sorry, for performance metrics. Other turnover metrics we are mentioning here. The fact that we saw the same conclusions or the same directions, at least, for not only CEO turnover, but for IR director turnover and general executive team turnover. So we have done other studies with turnover metrics, other performance metrics. We also applied those 2-step Heckman corrections. We tested in subsamples of our overall universe, and we replicate those regressions by changing the dependent variables. So we believe that we were able to establish new generalizations to our finding that is strengthening our claims that we have valid conclusions. In the conclusion section, we stress that we were able to establish this negative relationship between CO turnover and firm performance in general, with bad performance increasing the likelihood of happening turnover aspect is consistent with literature, not only Brazil, but abroad. But we could extend our findings to show that is also present, there is mistype here, but that this negative relationship is also valid for IR director turnover and to some extent to general executive turnover. So performance matters for executive turnover. And we can see here that also A&M listing also matters. Good corporate governance also matters, increasing the likelihood of CEO turnover by itself and also by its interaction with fund performance, which increases executive turnover performance sensitivity. And as family-controlled companies represents over 50% of our sample, this is especially relevant for family-controlled companies who usually face fewer turnover events. And listing reflecting the role of good governance, increase the monitoring of executives and CEO executive turnover. Is increasing turnover performance sensitivity, we believe, is due to the fact that through A&M listing, people will have to have a higher governance standard, a greater number of independent board members, greater disclosure, dispersion, which makes investors more interested and interacting with companies as they can appoint more board members, and this will increase turnover rates when fund performance is poor. So it's a relatively simple exercise that confirms several theories in empirical way, and there are some new findings as the first study to explore A&M listing as a variable, and also to address the relevance of A&M listing for family-controlled companies. So this is basically, I'm not sure if I was too fast. I'm keen to hear your comments, Professor Rodrigo, and to address any remaining question by the audience.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Now I'm going to share my slides. Just first, everything. Full screen. So now, first I'd like to congratulate you on the paper. It is very interesting paper, and the empirical estimation is very straightforward. How you model your analysis. It is a very simple, direct relationship. There are clear, practical implications, and you'll find there is a nice tension in the paper because say that the results linking this kind of financial performance tool, this kind of change was tenuous, and now provide more results in more robust way. You do several robustness tests. Because the paper is already published, I'm going to talk about the paper, what's suggested for the paper, but to talk about other ideas, other things that may be sorts of other papers of research in the future. First one is that nowadays people talk a lot about ESG, that's environment, society, governance. The G there. So you talked about how financial performance impacts this change, but does this kind of other environmental, social factors impact this change? I think this is a question that's very interesting, and this is a topic that's getting a lot of research nowadays. I think that's a very interesting place for further studies to grow out and to see if there is any kind of impact there. And one other thing about the paper is that the paper has a non-exogenous source of variation. Therefore, it's just correlation. So there is no kind of, although you try to diminish that, the hack two-step model, etc., change your proxies to try to see if the result is robust, but to get a robust correlation. So in the end, causation there. And therefore, maybe in a future papers can assess if there is kind of an exogenous shock that they can exploit, kind of show this result with more robustness, so argue instead of correlation to argue for a causation. And another thing is that there is a thing that when I read the paper about a dual causality, you see that less performance, okay, impacts CO turnover, but also CO turnover impacts performance. So you may get this kind of dual causality. So where is the arrow? Okay, because when you do the correlation is a line, and then we as researchers impose where the arrow of causality goes. Okay, we see that this kind of financial performance is correlated to the CO turnover, but where is the sign of this causal arrow? It goes from the changes in the financial performance. Therefore, you get change in CO, or you change the CO because of that you get low financial performance, and because you have low financial performance, then you change again. Going back to your analogy to soccer. So the team goes very poorly, and then start changing a lot of coaches, and then the teams continue doing poorly. Is that because the team is doing poorly and you're changing a lot of coaches because of that? Sorry. And let me just mute myself. Sorry. And or is the opposite? So is that the team is changing the coach a lot, and therefore they're not getting good performance. Okay, and therefore there is this kind of thing that's very hard for you to untangled, and goes back to the first thing. So not only the non-exogenous, they can change the correlates to causality, but also can help establish the causal direction. Okay, it's like the Tostini's paradox. Is it crunchy because it sells more, or it sells more because it's crunchy? So therefore, this is interesting. And I think that this can be good contributions. So these are my comments on some comments of this paper, but rather, if you want to continue researching this area, or other people that are watching want to kind of take this kind of ideas to kind of go forward and do some kind of research, I think that's very interesting. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, thank you for your comments, all very meaningful, but very relevant. In fact, it would be really interesting to see if reputational or SEG aspects are important, despite or above firm performance to CO turnover. I'm sure that they are also important, reputational for sure, and also companies that now have to address diversity or social aspects. When for the image of the company, it's important to change a CEO that has adequate performance, but the company needs to replace its image in the market somehow. This is important for sure, and I believe that we will see this more often, but it's really difficult to get hard data on this. Yes, we don't have an exogenous source of variation here, but we have addressed causality specifically in the thesis, and we mentioned this in the paper, but is also a concern, but we are sure about the direction. And also, when we mentioned another subject that's very linked to this is the role of managerial incentives. And this also has a Tostine effects. Sometimes a good CEO may lose interest in a company if this market is going down and the financial package the financial incentives they have will lose value. So in the CEO market, he may decide to leave for a better opportunity. This also explains why nowadays we have shorter tenures. Everyone is willing to have shorter cycles at companies, especially top executives. Of course, if everything is good, they can remain and be committed to long-term projects that they run. But often, if anything happens and they lose the financial interest to remain in the company, although they are doing a good job, but because of misspecification of incentives, they may have stock options that will lose value, and they look for better opportunities in the job market, in the CEO market. So this is also very interesting. We never know on average what happens, or in specific cases what happens. We have glances, hints of what is important. But for sure, as with why Jorge Jesus left Flamengo, this is a good analogy probably, and why they fired Dorival, but let's not enter this.
So I don't think that we have any questions here. So now just now talk about the next presenters. Can you? Okay, it's now being shared. So now thank you very much for your presentation. And now next month we're gonna get Jefferson Colon from ESP. He was formerly was a professor here at COPPEAD. Now he's at ESP. Then in May, we get Professor Bernardo Rica. He's an assistant professor at INSPER. And then we get Professor Giuseppe Trevisan. He's at the PIMS UFRJ, the graduate program in economics at the Federal University of Pernambuco. He's also the vice coordinator of the accounting program at the Federal University of Pernambuco. So these are the next presenters. So I'd like to thank Sergio a lot. It was a very interesting paper, and I hope those that watched the seminar will get some interesting ideas and know your research more. And I'd like to thank you very much. Invite you to come back to watch our seminars in the future. So next April will be the 25th of April. Our seminars are also always in the last Tuesday of the month. So thank you very much, and thank you for accepting to present your research here at COPPEAD.
Thank you, and I'm open to further questions and or any contacts. So thanks a lot for the invitation. It was a nice panel. Sorry for running up.
No problem. We were a little bit ahead of time. So thank you very much, and we see all of you again next month, the 25th of April. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.